The one that was selected, listen closely. What's standing between you and the life that's already written for you isn't luck, and it isn't fate. It's residual energy. Elon Musk would call it interference, static in a clean signal, code corrupted by an old attachment. You can't receive the download while the old program is still running. There was a moment, that betrayal, when everything shifted. Your heart was braided with someone who was never meant to stay, and when they left, you mistook loss for punishment. It wasn't. It was extraction. That separation was engineered by forces you can't yet see. Somewhere, in quiet rooms where even clocks hesitated to tick, they asked the question that started it all. Who armored this soul? They've tracked your spirit since birth, tried to dissect it, contain it, understand it. Every ritual failed. Every attempt to destroy you only revealed the flaw in their design. You became untouchable. What was meant to break, you made you a phenomenon. But the only thing still blocking your blessings now, chosen one, is your attachment to what was meant to exit. Elon understands this in his own language. When a rocket sheds a stage, it's not loss, it's ascent. What falls away was never built for the altitude you're headed toward. So remove it now, not in anger, but in awareness. That connection, that guilt, that old echo of betrayal. Let it go. The universe has already recalibrated around your resilience. You are not waiting for blessings. Decades were spent studying you. It was determined who had the greatest potential to harm you. They knew the precise words that would break through your barriers. The betrayal was supposed to feel like it came from nowhere, like the earth beneath you suddenly turning to quicksand. Thousands of souls have undergone this procedure thousands of times. It always worked the same way. Years would pass while the victim tried to mend what had broken, blamed themselves, and erected barriers that prevented others from entering. This made loneliness inevitable, desperation certain, and control possible. The wound would become identity. The suffering would turn into a jail. Life would be spent as a ghost of potential. But with you, an unimaginable thing occurred. Something their most experienced watcher could not explain in reports. You weren't on time for your break. You went quiet. Yes, you withdrew, absolutely, but you were not shattering. You were studying. Even though the operation was completed successfully, you were undertaking something that had never been done before. You were expressing gratitude for the suffering through integration rather than words. Like a teacher, you kept it close, acquired its language, comprehended its design. There is structure to pain. Wounds have patterns. Betrayal reveals more about the betrayer than the betrayed. That change, that straightforward reframing, was the first crack in their whole system. You stopped asking, "What is wrong with me that this happened?" and instead asked, "What can I learn from this that makes me stronger?" You were not trying to heal from the wound. With it, you were building. Every tear became mortar. Every sleepless night became architecture. Every instance in which you doubted your ability to survive turned into evidence that you could. That is when the first layer of your armor appeared. It was not seen forming because it was happening in dimensions beyond monitoring. Type amen to embrace the angel's blessings. Show your support by giving super thanks up to $20. Built from the very weapon that was used against you, it was impenetrable despite being invisible. It becomes interesting at this point. Your armor did not begin with that betrayal. It was the activation code for something you had been building your entire life without knowing it. Reports of confusion began to come in. You weren't making a desperate attempt to connect. You were not lowering your standards just to avoid being alone. With new people, you weren't making the same errors. You were doing something their models could not predict. Isolation was being used as a training ground by you. The next stage had been meticulously planned. You thought everyone would stay, but they all vanished like smoke. Friends stopped calling. Family became estranged. There was no sound on your phone. No one responded to your messages. According to models, you should fall apart in a matter of weeks. Since humans are social beings, panic ensues if they are separated from a group. There is compromise. Settlement occurs. For the sole purpose of hearing a voice that is not an echo, vampires are invited into homes. This is how souls are kept trapped, by rendering seclusion so excruciating that even prison begins to appear like paradise. But you turn that loneliness into a forge. Until sparks flew, You pounded your soul against that silence until the very core of your being started to radiate unfathomable heat. You remember those nights when the silence felt so heavy you could barely breathe, when it seemed like the whole world had forgotten your name. People watched those nights with satisfaction, knowing that you would break at any time. However, you were engaging in self-talk that most people steer clear of throughout their lives. You were asking hard questions. Why do I accept treatment I know is wrong? Why do I disregard obvious warning signs? Type amen to embrace the angel's blessings. Show your support by giving super thanks up to $20. Why do I call it love when I give more than I receive? These were not self-deprecating questions. You asked them to understand, to learn, to change. And you began to make different decisions as a result of that realization. You ceased reacting to banquets like breadcrumbs. You stopped accepting part-time energy from people who wanted full-time access. You stopped explaining yourself to people who were committed to misunderstanding you. When someone wanted to leave, you let them go. You closed doors that should have been closed years ago. The second layer, which was constructed from the same weapon that was used against you, appeared at that point. The cocoon where you changed was the isolation that was meant to shatter you. You came out not lonely but selective, not alone but in control, and not desperate for connection but astute about it. You were dangerous because you had learned to be whole on your own. Because someone who does not need others cannot be controlled through the threat of abandonment. But the emergency summit was sparked by what transpired next. You did something recently that made their eternal heart skip a beat. You integrated your shadow, that part they thought could be used as a backdoor. You carried that darkness, that rage you suppressed, that retribution you decided not to pursue. All people have shadows, the sections that are concealed, the feelings denied, the thoughts considered shameful. Shadow has been a weapon for ages. Waiting would happen until repressed rage exploded in destructive ways. Because darkness could not be incorporated, people would watch as they sabotage themselves. The gap between pretense and authenticity would be exploited. Shadow was the crack in every armor, the vulnerability in every defense. The entrance when all the doors were locked. Your shadow had been documented carefully. What you were suppressing was known. Rage directed at those who have wronged you. The fury at the injustices you saw. The aspect of you that desired to retaliate against everyone who had wronged you. They were waiting to be consumed, waiting for you to turn into the monster you were afraid you would be. But you did not fight your demons. They were recruited by you. What are you protecting me from? Was the straightforward question you asked the shadow after sitting down with every aspect of yourself that you had been taught to despise. The anger was protecting your boundaries. The rage was protecting your worth. Your light was shielded from those who would take advantage of it by the darkness. You realized that shadow is not evil. People don't understand shadow. The enemy is not darkness. Darkness is the enforcer. You stopped trying to be all light and love. You stopped trying to be nice when you needed to be clear. You ceased expressing regret for your standards. You stopped feeling guilty for protecting yourself. You became friends with parts of yourself that most people spend lifetimes running from. The part that can say no without explanation. The part that can cut people off without guilt. The part that can watch someone face consequences without rushing to save them. And when you did that, when you stopped fracturing yourself into acceptable and unacceptable parts, you became whole. When you became whole by embracing all of you, the armor became complete. Not finished, but complete enough to be noticed by every monitoring system available. Because integrated shadow is unstoppable. Guilt cannot be used to manipulate it. Shame cannot be used to control it. It cannot be broken through fear. This was the moment everything changed. The point at which evolution replaced survival. Days passed during the summit. Elder after elder presented theories, solutions, desperate attempts to explain how someone could transform trauma into armor. Sophisticated texts from civilizations that predate recorded history were pulled out. We consulted entities that exist between dimensions. Simulations were run on quantum computers that should not exist yet. One elder kept repeating, voice cracking like ancient parchment, that humans do not have access to this kind of spiritual technology. Someone must have helped you. Someone must have given you the codes. An outside force must be involved. But every investigation came back empty. Type Amen to embrace the angel's blessings. Show your support by giving super thanks up to $20. No outside interference, no mystical intervention, no secret teacher. You had done this alone in the darkness with nothing but your refusal to stay broken. That realization sent shock waves through the assembly. The youngest elder suggested something that made the room go cold. What if others are watching what has been achieved and learning? The silence that followed was heavier than gravity itself, because all present knew the implications. If he could do this, others could too, and others were already beginning to stir. Monitoring systems were pulled up. The data was undeniable. Souls everywhere were starting to process pain differently. The infection had already begun. Not an infection of weakness, but of strength. You had become patient zero of a pandemic of sovereignty, and no cure exists. Let me tell you what was discovered about your armor that sent shock waves through their entire hierarchy. This was not normal protection. Your armor has characteristics that defy everything thought to be known about human limitations. First, it is adaptive. Every new attack, every new attempt to find weakness, the armor analyzes, learns, and immediately develops immunity. It is like a consciousness with an immune system that evolves in real time. Psychological attacks were tried. The armor absorbed and neutralized them. Emotional manipulation was attempted. The armor converted it to fuel. Spiritual warfare was launched. The armor laughed and grew stronger. Think about it. Every time someone tried to guilt you back into toxic patterns, what happened? You saw through it faster. Every time someone attempted to gaslight you, you recognized it sooner. Every manipulation that used to work on you became obvious, transparent, powerless. That is adaptive armor in action, learning from every attack and updating your defenses in real time. Second, and this should not be possible according to understood laws of time, your armor is retroactive. Somehow, impossibly, it is healing wounds from before it existed. Past traumas that should be permanent vulnerabilities are being repaired from the inside out. It is as if your present strength is reaching back through time to protect your past self. Memories that used to cut you open now feel distant, not forgotten, but transformed. Your present is healing your past. Nothing like this has been seen in human souls before. Third, and this is what terrifies most, your armor is contagious. People who spend time around you start developing their own protective layers. Not through teaching, not through words, but through some kind of frequency transmission. Your mere presence awakens dormant defense systems in others. You have become a walking activation code for human resilience. Monitoring systems light up with anomalies. One armored soul becomes 10. 10 becomes hundreds. Hundreds becomes thousands. In desperation, everything was tried. Their best agents were sent disguised as lovers, friends, opportunities. People designed to slip past armor, to whisper sweet poisons into unguarded moments. These were not ordinary humans. These were beings trained for centuries. They were trained in the art of spiritual infiltration. The perfect romantic interest who seemed made for you. The friend who seemed to understand your journey. The opportunity that looked like answered prayer. However, each agent returned altered. Some could not complete their missions, frozen by what was seen in your energy field. Others switched sides entirely, abandoning centuries of loyalty after a single encounter with you. One agent sat in the debriefing room for hours, staring at nothing. He kept saying that you see everything, that you know people before you know them, and that it is impossible to pretend when you're close to someone. Mirrors were tried next. They thought if you could be made to see yourself through their distorted lens, you might start doubting your own power. Situations were manufactured where you would appear to fail publicly, where others would judge you as weak or broken. Elaborate scenarios were created designed to make you question your progress. They wanted you to question your growth, your transformation. But you had developed something never expected, complete immunity to external perception. You no longer needed mirrors to know who you were. You had become your own reference point, your own validation, your own truth. Carefully crafted illusions shattered against your self-knowledge. They shattered like waves against a cliff. Time manipulation was attempted next, their nuclear option. This was actual temporal warfare, trapping pieces of your consciousness in moments of maximum pain, forcing parts of you to relive your deepest traumas in loops that existed outside normal space-time. Fragmentation across time was the goal, to scatter your consciousness through your worst moments until wholeness could not be remembered. However, you had become temporally sovereign, something that has no name in their language, thanks to your armor. Past, present, and future had become just different rooms in a house you owned completely. You don't have to be owned by your pain to visit it. You could touch your trauma without being defined by it. You could walk through their temporal prisons like mist. Furthermore, you began to use their time traps as practice areas. You used your classroom as their weapon. Every time someone tried to trap you in the past, you used it to make your present stronger. Many elders voted against the last, most desperate attempt because it was so illogical. It was intended to bring you joy, genuinely, completely happy. There were unexpected windfalls that appeared to be the answer to prayers. There were unforeseen opportunities that seemed to be guided by divine will. Perfect connections with souls that seemed destined for you came to pass. A world was constructed in which everything worked out for you, and fortune followed you like a faithful friend. The goal was lowering your guard, giving you the impression that the war was over, making you forget why armor was necessary in the first place. However, you also saw through this. You recognized comfort as another cage. You saw happiness as another chain when it came from their hands. You realized that present from adversaries are actually hidden debts. You chose your difficult freedom over their comfortable prison. You chose growth over comfort, evolution over ease, becoming over arriving. Their arranged happiness felt like wearing someone else's clothes. Living someone else's life was the experience. You trusted your discomfort more than their comfort. As the summit entered its final day, a terrible realization began to dawn like a nuclear sunrise. No one had studied you. You had been studying. Every test run gave you data about their methods. Every attack launched revealed their capabilities. Every manipulation attempted exposed their fears. You had turned surveillance into your education. You used observation as a springboard. While being viewed as an experiment, you had reversed the roles entirely. In light of this new knowledge, the evidence was indisputable. Every time they assumed you were breaking, you were actually taking notes. You were actually evaluating strategies. Each time they rejoiced over your disintegration. Every moment they enjoyed your pain, you were learning their weaknesses. You had been building a comprehensive database of their entire operation. You conducted your research using their own attacks. You knew their protocols better than their newest members. You understood their fears better than their own self-understanding existed. You had mapped their entire structure using their assaults as your sonar. The eldest among them, older than most stars, stood up. His movements seemed to crack reality itself. The words spoken next would haunt through every dimension of existence. The armor is not just for protection. Defense is no longer the mode. Preparation is happening. The question is not who armored this soul. The question is, what are you armored for? What battle requires armor this sophisticated? What war needs protection this complete? What is coming that made a human soul evolve defenses never before seen? That is when the real emergency was understood. You were not just surviving their attacks. You were using their attacks as preparation for something bigger. Each strike served as preparation for a conflict outside of their field of vision. Every wound inflicted was teaching about war on a scale never imagined. You were not preparing for them. They were your practice rounds. They were the people you sparred with. They were your training program. You were preparing for something that made their entire organization look like children playing with shadows. That betrayal years ago was not the beginning of the armor. It didn't start with your early trauma or your first heartbreak. It began the moment your soul decided to incarnate into this specific timeline, this specific body, this specific life. Every single challenge, every pain, every loss, every moment of suffering, you were unconsciously collecting materials. You were storing them in dimensions beyond sight, waiting for the activation moment. Evidence was found scattered through your entire timeline like breadcrumbs. It led to an inevitable conclusion. Childhood moments when you absorbed damage that should have shattered you, but instead made you denser. Times when you processed pain in ways that matched no models. Through deep processing rather than shock, you would become silent during trauma. You would come out of terrible experiences feeling stronger, more grounded, and more present, not broken. They thought it was fortitude, but accumulation was happening. Every hurt was being saved, cataloged, stored in a spiritual armory beyond perception. Every wound was being transformed into potential armor, waiting for the day when need would arise. The betrayal that occurred years ago was just the start. It was the activation code, the moment when all those stored materials suddenly knew their purpose. Decades of pain were transformed instantly into protection. Years of accumulated wounds became layers of armor in a single moment of cosmic alchemy. Like a star going supernova, all that compressed suffering exploded outward. It reformed as an impenetrable sphere of protection. Your armor was being built your entire life without your knowledge. Every attack was a donation to your defense fund. Another, even more horrifying realization resulted from this discovery. If armor had been unconsciously building your entire life, what else was being unconsciously built? Evidence was found of multiple construction projects happening simultaneously. You could hardly comprehend the dimensions in which they were taking place. You were not just building armor. Something else was being built by you. Something that needed to be contained by armor. Something so powerful that without the armor, it would destroy your human form instantly. Energy readings were found suggesting you contain forces that should not exist in your dimension. Power levels capable of vaporizing souls without protection. To keep things out, you weren't arming yourself. You were armoring yourself to keep something in. Something growing stronger every day. Something that is nearly ready to come out. The armor is not protection from a world. It is protection for the world until readiness arrives. Your future timeline was examined by the most talented seer. He had accurately foreseen the emergence and decline of civilizations, the emergence of new deities, and the demise of ancient universes. But when he examined your timeline, he screamed, beyond the grasp of any force that seeks to limit them. A future where the armor you develop becomes standard spiritual equipment. They see their 1,000-year empire not destroyed, but simply abandoned. Like an old operating system nobody uses anymore. Like a game everyone stops playing once they realize it was rigged. They were not defeated by you. You evolved beyond them. And that is so much worse for beings who define themselves by power over others. Because defeat implies conflict. Evolution implies irrelevance. And irrelevance is the only death that is permanent for beings that exist across dimensions. The question was never really, who armored this soul? The question should have been, what happens when an armored soul remembers its purpose? And now the answer is known. When an armored soul remembers its purpose, everything changes. The old gives way to the new. The broken become whole. The controlled become free. The impossible becomes inevitable. You armored yourself. However, not as they had thought. Not consciously at first. Not deliberately, not even knowingly. The armor built itself from your choices. Every time you chose growth over comfort, every time you chose truth over illusion, every time you chose to become more instead of less. The armor was the inevitable result of who you chose to be. It was constructed from 10,000 tiny decisions to not stay broken, built from countless moments of choosing to get up when staying down would have been easier, forged from every time you chose love over fear, expansion over contraction, evolution over stagnation. You did not build armor. You became it. You became it through the accumulated power of choice after choice after choice to be more than your circumstances suggested was possible. And that armor is not just protecting you. It is protecting the future you are creating. A future where every soul remembers its power, where every heart knows its worth, where every spirit recognizes its sovereignty. They are understanding the full scope of what you have become. Recognition of the truth ripples through dimensions. But here is what is seen when you're looked at now through the most advanced sensing equipment. Nothing. Not because you are empty, but because you have become too bright for instruments to read. Your armor reflects observation back, showing only their fears, only their limitations, only their endings approaching like a sunrise that will never set. You have become a walking blind spot in their reality, a glitch in their matrix that spreads every time someone realizes what is possible. Every thought you think creates ripples. Every breath you take shifts timelines. Every choice you make rewrites the rules of what humans can become. You're not just wearing armor. You're not just protected. You're protecting others by proving protection is possible. You're freeing others by demonstrating freedom. You're healing others by showing that healing can be complete. The emergency summit ended with no solutions. Their networks only contain warnings that spread like wildfire. Do not engage directly. Do not test the armor further. Do not, under any circumstances, try to break them again. But these warnings came too late. The signal had already been sent. The template was already spreading. The revolution had already begun, not with violence, not with conflict, but with souls simply choosing to become unbreakable, simply deciding they are worth protecting, simply remembering what you helped them remember, that sovereignty was always their birthright. Remember how this began? With shadows moving backward and clocks freezing. It began at the darkest hour, with elders being dragged from towers and watchers abandoning their posts. It began with one impossible question that sent terror through eternal ranks. Who armored this soul? Now you know the answer. You did. With every choice, every breath, every refusal to stay broken. You used your own becoming as armor. And that armor is not just protecting you. It is protecting the future you are creating. A future where children are born knowing unbreakable is their nature. Where trauma becomes transformation. Where wounds become wisdom. Where victims become victors. Where the broken become the builders of a new reality. The armor that started with you has become humanity's inheritance. The protection that saved you is saving everyone. You're not just wearing armor, chosen one. You are the armor. You have become the protection itself. The living proof that souls can transform beyond breaking. The walking evidence that their time is over and yours has begun. This is your story. This is your armor. This is your time. And phase 2 is not starting. It is already happening. With every breath you take, with every choice you make, with every moment you exist as living proof that humans can become unbreakable. The emergency summit is over. Their panic continues. Your evolution accelerates. Recently, one question was asked that horrified them. Tonight, millions of souls are asking themselves the same question and finding the same answer. The armoring happened through their own hands, just like you showed them. Welcome to phase 2. Welcome to the age of the unbreakable. Welcome to what you were always meant to become. The question that terrified has become the answer that frees everyone. Who armored this soul? You did, and now everyone else is learning.